The September evening air carried the first hint of autumn as Marcus Whitmore stood at the entrance of Riverside Park, his heart sinking with each passing minute. His golden retriever, Bella, had been gone for 3 hours now. 3 hours since that cyclist had startled her during their evening walk. 3 hours since her leash had slipped from his distracted grip while he'd been answering an urgent email from Tokyo. 3 hours that felt like an eternity. Marcus ran a hand through his graying hair, his expensive Italian suit jacket now draped over a park bench, his tie loosened and askew. At 42, he'd built a tech empire worth hundreds of millions, negotiated deals across continents, and faced boardrooms full of skeptical investors without flinching. But standing here, calling Bella's name until his voice grew hoarse, he'd never felt more powerless. She wasn't just a pet. After his divorce 2 years ago, after his daughter Emma had moved to Boston for college, Bella had become his constant companion, the warm presence that greeted him in his too-large penthouse apartment, the reason he left the office before midnight, the unconditional love that asked nothing but a walk and a scratch behind the ears. He'd already filed a report with park security, posted on every lost pet website and social media platform his assistant could find, and even offered a $10,000 reward. Money, he'd learned long ago, could solve most problems. But as darkness settled over the park's 300 acres of woods, ponds, and winding trails, he was beginning to understand that some things couldn't be bought. "Sir, we're closing the park in 30 minutes. A young security guard approached him, sympathy evident in her voice. "We've got all our people looking, and we'll keep checking through the night. But you should probably head home, get some rest. Dogs are smart. They usually find their way back." Marcus nodded mechanically, but he couldn't leave. Not yet. He walked toward the north section of the park, where the manicured lawns gave way to a more natural landscape. The maintenance area sat near the edge, a cluster of buildings where park workers stored equipment and took their breaks. It was getting darker now, the streetlights creating pools of orange light along the pathways while the areas between fell into shadow. What Marcus didn't know was that at that exact moment, on the other side of those maintenance buildings, Carlos Mendoza was discovering something that would change both their lives forever. Carlos had just finished his shift at the Hoffman Tower downtown, a gleaming 40-story building where he'd spent the last 6 years mopping floors, emptying trash bins, and cleaning executive bathrooms. His shift ran from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, a schedule that paid slightly better than day shifts but left him perpetually exhausted, caught between the world of the living and a half-existence of stolen sleep during daylight hours. At 35, Carlos had the kind of quiet dignity that comes from accepting life's disappointments without becoming bitter. He'd arrived in the United States from El Salvador 12 years ago with a degree in electrical engineering that no one here recognized, a head full of dreams, and exactly $300 in his pocket. Reality had been harsher than he'd imagined. Language barriers, immigration status complications, and the simple fact that American employers wanted American degrees had closed door after door. Janitorial work had been meant as temporary, just until he could get his credentials recognized, save enough for more school, build a better life. But temporary had a way of becoming permanent when you were sending money back home to help your mother with medical bills, helping your younger sister finish university, trying to keep your head above water in a city where rent consumed most of your paycheck. He'd cut through Riverside Park on his way home, as he often did. The morning walk through the quiet park helped him decompress, transition from the fluorescent-lit world of office buildings to his small studio apartment in Queens. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Carlos breathed in the fresh air, so different from the chemical smell of cleaning products that clung to his clothes. That's when he heard it, a soft whimpering coming from behind the maintenance building. Carlos stopped, listening. There it was again, He approached slowly, not wanting to frighten whatever animal might be hurt or scared. Behind a stack of lumber and old equipment, he found her. A golden retriever, muddy and trembling. Her collar twisted and caught on a piece of exposed rebar. Her eyes were wide with fear, but when she saw Carlos, her tail gave a tentative wag. "Hey there, beautiful girl," Carlos said softly, in that universal tone of gentleness that transcends language. "Let's get you out of there." He approached slowly, letting her smell his hand. The dog's tail wagged more enthusiastically. She wasn't aggressive, just scared and stuck. Carlos carefully worked the collar free from the rebar, his hands steady despite his exhaustion. Once freed, the dog pressed against his legs, shaking but clearly grateful. Carlos checked her collar. "Bella," he read the tag. There was a phone number, but when he tried calling it from his old flip phone, it went straight to voicemail. The battery had probably died. It was nearly 7 in the morning, and if this dog had been lost for hours, the owner's phone might have died from constant use trying to find her. He could have called animal control. It would have been the simple thing to do. Turn the dog over to professionals, go home, sleep. He had to work again that night, and he desperately needed rest. But Carlos looked at Bella's trusting eyes and thought about how he'd feel if something he loved was lost, dependent on the kindness of strangers. "Okay, Bella," he said, scratching behind her ears. "Let's find your family." Carlos lived in a building that didn't allow pets, so taking Bella home wasn't an option. Instead, he walked her to a nearby deli where the owner, Mr. Kim, knew him as a regular customer. After explaining the situation, Mr. Kim agreed to let Carlos tie Bella safely in the small courtyard behind the shop while he figured out what to do. What Carlos did next, running on no sleep and with his own problems waiting, said everything about who he was. He went to a print shop and spent $20 he didn't really have to spare printing color flyers with Bella's photo taken on his phone, and the phone number from her collar. Then he spent his entire day off walking through Riverside Park and the surrounding neighborhoods, taping flyers to every pole, asking every person he encountered if they'd seen the dog's owner. His feet ached in his worn sneakers. His eyes burned with fatigue. His stomach growled because he'd skipped lunch to cover more ground. But every time he thought about stopping, he imagined someone out there desperately searching for Bella, and he kept going. Marcus had gone home only because his assistant had threatened to call his doctor if he didn't get some rest. He'd barely slept, startling awake every hour, checking his phone for messages about Bella. Now, at 2 in the afternoon, he was back at the park, walking the same paths he'd covered yesterday, calling her name with a voice made rough from exhaustion and emotion. That's when he saw it. A flyer taped to a lamppost. His breath caught. There was Bella's face, and beneath it, "Found. Golden Retriever, female, answers to Bella. Very friendly and safe. Call Carlos." Marcus's hands shook as he dialed the number. It rang 4 times before a man answered, his voice thick with sleep. "Hello. You found my dog," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "You found Bella." There was a pause, then the sound of someone sitting up quickly. Yes, she's safe. She's at Kim's Deli on Amsterdam Avenue. I can meet you there." 30 minutes later, Marcus pulled up to the deli in his Mercedes. He'd barely put the car in park before he was out and following the directions to the courtyard. There she was, Bella, clean now, with a bowl of water beside her, her tail wagging frantically as she recognized him. "Bella!" Marcus dropped to his knees as she bounded toward him, her whole body wiggling with joy. He wrapped his arms around her, not caring about the dog hair on his cashmere sweater, not caring about the tears streaming down his face. God, I thought I'd lost you. She's a good dog, a voice said. Marcus looked up to see a man standing in the doorway. Latino, probably mid-30s, with kind eyes and work-worn hands, wearing clothes that had seen better days. This was Carlos. Marcus stood, still holding Bella's leash, and extended his hand. Marcus Whitmore, I don't know how to thank you. The reward I posted was $10,000, but honestly, I'd have paid anything. Carlos shook his hand but looked confused. Reward? I didn't see any reward. I just found her stuck behind some equipment at the park this morning and wanted to make sure she got home. This morning? Marcus frowned. You've had her all day? Yes, sir. I tried calling the number on her collar, but it went to voicemail. So I made some flyers and spent the day putting them up around the park area. Marcus pulled out his phone and realized with a sinking feeling that it had died sometime during his restless sleep. My phone died. I didn't see any flyers. How many did you put up? Maybe 100? I walked most of the neighborhoods around the park. Carlos said it matter-of-factly, as if spending your entire day off searching for a stranger's lost pet was the most normal thing in the world. Marcus stared at him, genuinely stunned. You spent your whole day doing this? Don't you have work? I work nights, cleaning offices downtown. Today was my day off. Carlos shrugged. But I kept thinking about how worried you must be. I have a nephew back home in El Salvador. If his dog was lost, I'd hope someone would help. Something in the way Carlos spoke, the intelligence in his eyes despite his exhaustion, the careful precision of his English, made Marcus curious. What did you do before cleaning offices? Carlos hesitated, as if this was a story he'd told too many times to people who didn't really care. I was an electrical engineer in El Salvador. But here, my degree doesn't count for much. I've been trying to save money to go back to school, get American certification, but he gestured vaguely, a motion that encompassed rent, bills, family obligations, the general impossibility of getting ahead when you're barely keeping up. Marcus found himself seeing Carlos differently, not just as the man who'd found his dog, but as someone with untapped potential, someone who'd spent his day off helping a stranger despite having every reason to take the easy path. Are you hungry? Let me buy you lunch. It's the least I can do. They went to a small restaurant nearby, Bella lying contentedly at Marcus's feet. Over burgers and coffee, Carlos told his story, not in a bid for sympathy, but simply answering Marcus's genuinely interested questions. He talked about the university in San Salvador, about designing electrical systems for buildings, about the dream of doing that work here in the United States. He mentioned studying online in his spare time, trying to keep his skills sharp, but admitted it was hard to focus when you worked all night and tried to sleep during the day while neighbors played music and traffic rumbled outside. Marcus listened, really listened, in a way he hadn't listened to anyone in a long time. In Carlos, he saw something that reminded him of himself 20 years ago. Hungry, talented, held back only by circumstances and lack of opportunity. He thought about all the mediocre people he'd hired over the years because they had the right credentials, the right connections, the right background. And here was someone brilliant, spending his nights mopping floors. What if you didn't have to do that anymore? Marcus asked suddenly. Carlos looked up, confused. What do you mean? I mean, what if I could help you get your credentials? My company has connections with MIT, Columbia, several engineering programs. We sponsor foreign professionals for visa programs all the time. And we're always looking for electrical engineers. Our new data center project needs people who understand complex power systems. Carlos set down his coffee cup carefully, as if afraid this moment might shatter. Sir, I appreciate the gesture, but I can't accept charity. It's not charity, Marcus said firmly. You spent your entire day off, exhausted from working all night, helping someone you'd never met. You didn't do it for a reward, you didn't even know there was one. You did it because it was the right thing to do. That tells me more about your character than any resume ever could. I'm not offering you a handout. I'm offering you an opportunity. But you'd have to earn it, just like everyone else. If you're enjoying this story, please hit subscribe and let me know in the comments what you think will happen next. Your support means everything. Carlos looked at Marcus for a long moment, searching his face for signs of insincerity or pity. But he saw only genuine respect and opportunity. I don't know what to say. Say you'll come to my office tomorrow for a proper interview. Meet my chief technology officer. Show us what you can do. If you're as good as I think you are, we'll figure out the rest, credentials, visa sponsorship, everything. But no promises except this. You'll get a fair shot. That night, Carlos couldn't sleep, and for once it wasn't because of his work schedule. He lay in his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling of his studio apartment. The business card Marcus had given him resting on his chest. Marcus Whitmore, CEO, Whitmore Technologies. He'd looked up the company on his phone. It was huge, innovative, respected, exactly the kind of place he'd dreamed of working when he was a student in San Salvador. Part of him was terrified this was too good to be true, that he'd show up and discover it was all a misunderstanding, or worse, some kind of elaborate prank. But another part of him, the part that had kept him studying and hoping through 6 years of mopping floors, whispered that maybe this was his chance. Maybe helping Bella had been fate or luck, or just the universe rewarding a good deed. He got up and turned on his laptop, reviewing everything he'd been studying. If Marcus was serious, if this interview was real, Carlos wasn't going to waste it. He spent the rest of the night preparing, reviewing complex electrical concepts, practicing how he'd explain his past projects, reminding himself that he was good at this, that his degree from El Salvador might not impress American employers, but the knowledge behind it was solid. The next afternoon, Carlos stood in front of the gleaming Whitmore Technologies building, a 50-story tower of glass and steel in Manhattan's tech corridor. He wore his only suit, bought secondhand 5 years ago, pressed carefully that morning. His hands were shaking slightly as he entered the lobby and gave his name to security. Mr. Mendoza, you're expected. 40th floor. The security guard handed him a visitor badge with a smile that suggested this wasn't unusual, that people came for interviews all the time. The elevator ride felt endless. When the doors opened, he stepped into a reception area that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Sleek, modern, with screens displaying flowing data visualizations and what looked like real-time maps of global internet traffic. A young woman approached with a professional smile. Carlos Mendoza? I'm Jennifer, Mr. Whitmore's assistant. He's waiting for you in the conference room, along with Dr. Sarah Chun, our CTO. Can I get you some water or coffee? Water, please, Carlos managed, his mouth suddenly dry. She led him down a corridor lined with photos of the company's achievements, awards, ribbon cuttings, images of data centers and server farms. Then into a glass-walled conference room where Marcus stood with a woman in her 40s who had sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of someone who didn't suffer fools. Carlos, good to see you. Marcus shook his hand warmly, and Carlos noticed he seemed different here. More in his element, yet still carrying that same genuine interest from yesterday. This is Dr. Sarah Chun. She runs all our technical operations. Sarah, this is the man I told you about. Sarah offered her hand. Marcus says you're an electrical engineer. I'll be honest, I was skeptical. We usually recruit from top-tier universities. But Marcus told me what you did for his dog, and that speaks to character. So let's see what you've got." What followed was the most intense 2 hours of Carlos's life. Sarah didn't go easy on him. She threw complex problems at him: power load calculations for hypothetical data centers, electrical system redundancy designs, questions about thermal management and energy efficiency. At first, Carlos's answers were hesitant, nervous. But as he got into the technical details, something shifted. This was his language. This was what he was good at. He grabbed a marker and went to the whiteboard, sketching out a power distribution system, explaining his reasoning with growing confidence. He referenced recent developments in electrical engineering, proving he'd kept up with the field despite his circumstances. When Sarah challenged his approach, he defended it with solid logic, then acknowledged where her alternative might be better, showing both knowledge and humility. Marcus watched silently, but Carlos could feel his attention, his evaluation. This wasn't about sympathy anymore. This was about proving he deserved to be here. Finally, Sarah sat back and looked at Marcus, then at Carlos. "Okay, I'm impressed. Your fundamentals are rock solid, and you're clearly keeping up with current developments. But I have to be honest, we need to get you proper certification, and that takes time. We're talking at least a year of coursework while you work as a junior engineer, proving yourself." "I'll do whatever it takes," Carlos said immediately. "I've been waiting 12 years for a chance like this. I won't let you down." Sarah glanced at Marcus, who nodded. She turned back to Carlos. "All right, here's what we can offer. Starting salary of $75,000, with full benefits while you complete your certification through Columbia's professional engineering program, which we'll pay for. You'll work under supervision until you're fully certified, at which point we'll reassess your position and salary. We'll also sponsor your visa situation, get you on a proper work permit. But understand, this isn't charity. You'll be working hard, probably harder than you've ever worked, because you'll be catching up while also proving yourself. Can you handle that?" $75,000. Carlos had been making $28,000 as a janitor. This was more than 3 times that, plus education, plus a future. He felt dizzy with the enormity of it. "Yes," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion swelling in his chest. "Absolutely yes." Marcus stood and extended his hand again. "Welcome to Whitmore Technologies, Carlos. I have a feeling you finding Bella wasn't just good luck for me. The next few months were a whirlwind." Carlos gave notice at his janitorial job, his supervisor surprised but genuinely happy for him. He moved into a better apartment, still modest but with actual windows that let in sunlight, in a quieter neighborhood where he could sleep properly. He started his coursework at Columbia while working at Whitmore Technologies, and Sarah was right, it was the hardest he'd ever worked. But it was a different kind of hard. Instead of numbing exhaustion from mopping endless floors, this was the exhaustion of mental challenge, of pushing himself to learn and grow. His colleagues, once they got over the unusual circumstances of his hiring, found him to be exactly what Marcus had seen: intelligent, dedicated, and humble. He brought fresh perspectives to problems, approaching things from angles that people who'd followed traditional paths might not consider. Marcus checked in on his progress regularly, not in a patronizing way but with genuine interest. Sometimes they'd have lunch, and Carlos began to understand that Marcus was lonely too in his own way. Success had isolated him, surrounded him with people who wanted something from him or were intimidated by him. In Carlos, he'd found someone who knew what it was like to struggle, who didn't take success for granted because it hadn't been guaranteed. They talked about their lives. Marcus about his daughter Emma, how proud he was of her studying environmental science at Boston University, but how much he missed her daily presence. Carlos about his mother in El Salvador, how he could finally send her enough money for better medical treatment, how his sister had graduated and was now a teacher. And they talked about Bella, who'd become something of a mascot at Whitmore Technologies, occasionally coming to the office where she was universally loved. 6 months into Carlos's new position, Marcus invited him to his penthouse apartment for dinner. A casual thing, he'd said, with his daughter visiting from college. Carlos accepted nervously, still not entirely comfortable in this world of wealth and privilege, but wanting to be gracious. Emma Whitmore turned out to be a younger, female version of her father, sharp, curious, and kind. At 20, she had that college student's passionate idealism, talking excitedly about climate change, social justice, and environmental policy. Over pasta that Marcus had cooked himself, surprisingly good, he'd taken cooking classes after the divorce. Emma asked Carlos about his journey. Carlos told his story, and Emma listened with rapt attention. When he finished, she turned to her father. "Dad, this is exactly what I've been talking about. There are thousands, probably millions of people like Carlos, with talent and drive but no opportunities. We need more people willing to give chances like you did." Marcus smiled. "Actually, we've been discussing that at the company. Carlos gave me an idea." Carlos looked up, surprised. "I did. You did. You mentioned all those people you knew from your janitor days. Smart people working menial jobs because of immigration status or unrecognized credentials or just bad luck. What if we created a program specifically to identify and help people like that? Partner with community colleges, immigrant organizations, create pathways for talented people who just need a chance. We could call it the Second Chance Initiative." Emma's eyes lit up. "Dad, that's amazing. You should absolutely do it." Carlos felt emotion welling up. 6 months ago, he'd been invisible, just another face in maintenance uniform. Now he was sitting in a penthouse, eating dinner with his boss and his boss's daughter, hearing that his story had inspired a program to help others like him. "I'd like to help with that," he said quietly. "If you'll let me. I know the communities, the challenges. I could help identify good candidates." "I was hoping you'd say that," Marcus said. "I can fund the program, but we need someone who's lived it to help run it. Someone who knows real talent when they see it, regardless of what their resume looks like. Someone who'd spend their day off putting up 100 flyers for a lost dog." That was 2 years ago. Now, at 37, Carlos Mendoza was a fully certified electrical engineer and the director of Whitmore Technologies' Second Chance Initiative. The program had helped place 43 people into career track positions, janitors who became programmers, delivery drivers who became business analysts, home health aides who became medical technology specialists. Each one carefully vetted by Carlos, who had an eye for spotting potential that others missed, because he'd been that potential once. The company's new data center, the one Sarah had mentioned in that first interview, was now operational, with Carlos having played a key role in designing its electrical systems. His work had been so impressive that he'd been promoted to senior engineer, with a salary that let him bring his mother to the United States for extended visits and help his sister open her own school in El Salvador. Marcus and Carlos had become genuine friends, an unlikely bond across differences in background and wealth, but built on mutual respect and that shared moment when Carlos had chosen kindness over convenience. They still had lunch regularly, sometimes talking business, sometimes just talking about life. Bella, now 10 years old, had slowed down a bit but still greeted Carlos with enthusiastic tail wags whenever she saw him, as if she remembered that early morning when he'd found her scared and stuck, and had chosen to help. On the 2-year anniversary of that day, Marcus threw a party at the company. It was officially to celebrate the Second Chance initiative, but everyone knew it was really about Carlos. Emma flew in from Boston, where she was now in graduate school for environmental policy. Sarah gave a speech about how Carlos had become one of their most valuable engineers. Several people whose lives had been changed by the program shared their stories. But the moment that meant the most came at the end, when Marcus asked everyone to gather round. 2 years ago, I was in Riverside Park, searching for my lost dog, feeling completely helpless. I'm a CEO, I run a company worth billions, I'm used to solving problems. But in that moment, all my money and power meant nothing. I couldn't find what I'd lost. He paused, looking at Carlos. Carlos found Bella behind a maintenance building at dawn, after working all night. He could have called animal control and gone home to sleep. Instead, he spent his entire day off making sure she got home safely. He didn't know who I was. He didn't know there was a reward. He just knew someone was probably worried, and he wanted to help. Marcus's voice grew thick with emotion. When I met Carlos and learned his story, I realized something. We spend so much time looking for the right credentials, the right background, the right resume. But what really matters is character. It's the person who helps when they don't have to, who keeps studying when the odds are against them, who stays kind even when life hasn't been kind to them. Carlos had all of that, but no one had given him a chance to show it. He turned to address the room. So yes, we're celebrating a program that's helped dozens of people. But more than that, we're celebrating the idea that talent is everywhere, but opportunity isn't. That sometimes the most qualified person for the job is the one no one's bothering to look at. And that a lost dog can lead to a found future, if we're paying attention. The room erupted in applause. Carlos, never comfortable with attention, felt his eyes burning. Emma hugged him, followed by Sarah and dozens of colleagues who'd come to respect him over the past 2 years. Later that night, after the party wound down, Marcus, Carlos, Emma, and Bella walked through Riverside Park. It was September again, the air carrying that same hint of autumn that it had 2 years ago. They walked to the spot where Bella had first slipped her leash, then over to the maintenance building where Carlos had found her. "You know what's funny?" Marcus said, watching Bella sniff happily around the area, now familiar and unthreatening. "I spent that whole day thinking I'd lost everything that mattered. And I had lost something. My sense that I could control everything, that money could solve any problem. But finding Bella led me to something more valuable. It reminded me that the best things in life are usually connected to the best people. And the best people are often the ones you don't expect." Carlos smiled, his hands in his pockets, finally comfortable in this world that had once seemed impossibly distant. "I spent 12 years thinking I'd lost my chance, that I'd made a mistake coming here, that my engineering degree was worthless. One morning, finding a scared dog, I got it all back. So I guess we both found what we'd lost. And I got a really good engineer and a friend out of the deal," Marcus added. "Best $10,000 I never had to spend." They all laughed, the sound carrying through the quiet park. Emma threw a stick for Bella, who bounded after it with puppyish enthusiasm despite her age. They walked slowly, enjoying the evening, talking about everything and nothing: Carlos's upcoming marriage to a woman he'd met at a community center, Emma's thesis on environmental justice, Marcus's plans to expand the Second Chance initiative nationwide. As they walked, they passed the lamppost where Carlos had taped that first flyer 2 years ago. Someone had put up a new lost dog poster, and Carlos stopped to read it. Without hesitation, he pulled out his phone and took a picture of the flyer. "I'll keep an eye out," he said to Marcus. "Post it at the company, walk around the area tomorrow." Maybe this dog's owner will get lucky too. Marcus just smiled, not surprised at all. This was who Carlos was. Someone who'd found his own second chance and wanted to make sure others found theirs too. They continued walking, for souls brought together by a twist of fate, a scared dog, and the decision to help when help wasn't required, but was desperately needed. What do you think of this story? If it touched your heart, please subscribe to see more stories like this. Years later, when people asked Marcus about his company's success, about the innovative programs they created, he always came back to this story. Not because it was dramatic or extraordinary, but because it was simple. A man who'd worked all night chose to spend his day off helping. Another man who could have just paid a reward chose to really see the person who'd helped him. And that small moment of genuine human connection had rippled outward, changing lives, creating opportunities, building something meaningful. Sometimes in business schools, Marcus was invited to speak about leadership and innovation. He always told the story, always emphasized the same point. The best hire I ever made wasn't someone with an Ivy League degree or impressive credentials. It was someone who showed me, through his actions, who he really was. I've learned to look for character first because skills can be taught but integrity can't. We're all looking for the right people to help build our dreams. But sometimes the right person is right in front of us, in the most unexpected place, if we just take the time to really see them. Carlos, for his part, never forgot where he'd come from. Even as he rose through the company, even as his salary climbed and his responsibilities grew, he stayed connected to the immigrant communities he'd once been part of. He volunteered at community centers, mentored young people, and personally reviewed every application to the Second Chance initiative. He remembered what it felt like to be invisible, to have potential that no one acknowledged, to work hard with no guarantee it would ever lead anywhere. And he made sure that as many people as possible got what he'd gotten, a chance. The program became a model copied by other companies. News outlets did stories about it. Business journals analyzed its success. But for Carlos, the best moments were simple ones. When someone he'd helped got their first promotion, when a former delivery driver successfully completed their programming certification, when a home health aide sent him a photo of their new office on their first day as a medical analyst. These were the moments that mattered, proof that giving people opportunities wasn't just good ethics, it was good business. Bella lived to be 14, a good long life for a golden retriever. When she finally passed away, surrounded by Marcus and Emma in the veterinary office, Carlos came to say goodbye too. He sat with her for a while, scratching behind her ears the way he had that first morning, whispering thank you for being scared and stuck in just the right place at just the right time. Marcus got another dog eventually, a rescue named Lucky. But he never forgot Bella, or that September day when losing her had led to finding something he hadn't known he was looking for. He kept a photo on his desk, not a professional portrait, but a simple picture Carlos had taken with his old flip phone that morning in the deli courtyard. Bella's face muddy and happy, her tail mid-wag. It reminded him every day that sometimes the most valuable things come from the most unexpected places, and the best investments are the ones you make in people. As for Carlos, he kept his old janitor's uniform in his closet, cleaned and pressed. Not as a shrine to past struggles, but as a reminder that dignity isn't found in titles or salaries. It's found in how you treat people when you have nothing to gain from it. He'd been a good janitor, taking pride in his work even when no one noticed. And he was a good engineer for the same reason, because he believed in doing things right, in helping when he could, in staying kind even when the world wasn't kind back. Sometimes on quiet evenings, Carlos and Marcus would sit on Marcus's balcony, looking out over the city, and talk about that day. They never got tired of the story, of the perfect timing, the series of small decisions that had led to everything changing. Carlos choosing to cut through the park, finding Bella at just the right moment, deciding to help instead of taking the easy path. Marcus seeing past the worn clothes and tired eyes to the person underneath. The conversation over burgers, the interview, all of it. "You know what I think about most?" Carlos said once, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "All the times I almost didn't help. When I first heard Bella whimpering, I almost kept walking. When I freed her, I almost just called animal control. When I was putting up flyers, I almost stopped a dozen times because I was so tired. Any one of those moments, if I'd made a different choice, none of this happens." Marcus nodded slowly. "And I almost didn't stop to talk to you. I was so focused on getting Bella back. I almost just grabbed her and left. I almost didn't ask about your background, almost didn't offer to help." It's strange how life turns on these tiny moments, these small decisions to do a little more than you have to. They sat in comfortable silence. Two men from completely different worlds who'd found friendship in the most unlikely way. The city stretched out below them, millions of lights starting to appear as darkness fell, each one representing a life, a story, potential waiting to be recognized. Somewhere down there, Carlos knew were people like he'd been, talented, hardworking, invisible, waiting for their chance. And because of what had started with a lost dog and a janitor who chose kindness, more of them would get that chance. That was the real story Marcus and Carlos both understood. Not just about a lost dog being found, but about all the potential that gets lost in our society because we don't look closely enough, because we judge by credentials instead of character, because we don't give people the benefit of the doubt. Bella had been lost and was found. But Carlos had been lost too, in a different way, his talents unseen, his potential untapped. And Marcus had been lost as well, his daughter far away, his life filled with success but lacking the meaningful connections that make success worthwhile. They'd all been found that day in their own ways, and the ripples were still spreading, touching lives, creating opportunities, proving that sometimes the most important thing you can do is help when you don't have to, see when others don't look, and believe in people before they've proven they deserve it. Because everyone deserves a chance to show what they're capable of. Everyone deserves to be seen. Thank you so much for watching this story. I hope it inspired you as much as it inspired me to write it. Please leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Your support helps me continue creating these stories. Until next time, remember to look for the good in people and to help when you can. You never know whose life you might change.